In this video I will try to cancel the tariffs and change the global world order with a simple elementary school math example. And I'm not even joking. This example from business school changed how I saw the world from that point onwards. And I think there's a high risk that certain key politicians haven't understood it. Your assignment after this video is to take this and go educate your elected representatives. Whether you live in the US or Europe or in Asia or somewhere else. Say that we have two farmers, Larsson and Donald. Any resemblance to any real people is purely coincidental. Larsson and Donald have 2 plots of land each, and they both grow potatoes and olives, but one is better than the other one at everything. Larsson grows 120 potatoes per plot and 150 olives, but Donald, he grows 150 potatoes and 300 olives. So at the end of the day, Larsson eats 120 potatoes, 150 olives. Donald is very happy. Donald gets more. He eats 150 potatoes and 300 olives. Donald is better at everything. He's the best farmer in the world. And Larsson, he just isn't very good. So here's the baseline. Together they produce 120 plus 150, 270 potatoes, and 150 plus 300, 450 olives. But if you look carefully, even though Donald is better at everything, he's massively better at the olives, twice as good, while he's only little better at the potatoes, 150 versus 120. Larsson's capability, if he goes all in on the potatoes, 240 potatoes. If he grows only olives, is 300. Donald, if he only grows olives, he makes 600, or if he only grows potatoes, he makes 300. Now what if they mostly specialize? So Larsson grows mostly potatoes, little bit of olives. Donald grows mostly olives, and then Larsson sends some potatoes to Donald, and Donald sends some olives to Larsson. Let's see what happens, and I promise you that you can follow along. Say that Larsson does 90% potatoes, so out of his capability of 240, he does 90% potatoes, or 216. Out of his olive capability, he does the remaining 10%, or 30 olives. Donald does 72% olives, so out of his capability of 600, he does 72% olives, or 432. On the remaining 28% of his land, he does potatoes, so out of 300% max capability, 28% potatoes, or 84 potatoes. What happens now if we add these up? We see that we have made more potatoes and more olives in total. More of both. But now what happens if they trade with each other? Larsson sends some potatoes to Donald, and Donald sends some olives to Larsson. Larsson minus 80 potatoes. Donald gets plus 80 potatoes. Donald minus 126 olives. Larsson plus 126 olives. So let's add them up. 216 minus 80 is 136. 30 plus 126 is 156. 84 plus 80 is 164. 432 minus 126 is 306. And here comes the magic. If you now look at how many potatoes and olives Larsson has today, it's 136 and 156. In the baseline, he had 120 and 150. He has gotten more potatoes and more olives. But clearly, that must be at the expense of the better farmer. Right? Let's check. In the baseline, Donald had 150 potatoes and 300 olives. Now he has 164 potatoes and 306 olives. Donald also got more potatoes and more olives, just like Larsson. So both Larsson and Donald got more of both potatoes and olives. Even if Donald is better than Larsson at everything, both still get more potatoes and more olives by trading. So even if one country is better in everything, both still benefit from trade. And in reality, some countries are massively better at different things. China is massively better at manufacturing. It's not only cost, it's competence, speed, quality, cost, all of them. And if this doesn't get reeled in soon, this trade war will spread to services too. And basically all of the internet services that I'm using, at least, they're American. They're massively better at that. So what happens if one of them is actually better at something? Now Larsson is actually better at the potatoes. In the baseline where both do everything, Larsson does 150 potatoes and 50 olives. Donald does 60 potatoes but 180 olives. All in on the olives. He really smashes it with the olives. Now the capability for Larsson is 300 potatoes or 100 olives. Donald can either do 120 potatoes or 360 olives, if he grows it on both plots. Now let's do a simpler specialization scenario, where Larsson does potatoes on 70% of his plots and Donald does olives on 70% of his plots. 300 times 70% is 210. On the remaining 30% he does olives or 30 olives. On Donald's max capability of 360, he does 70% olives or 252, and the remaining 30% of his capacity he spends on potatoes and gets 36 potatoes. Once again, in total they produce more potatoes and more olives. Now let's do a simpler trade scenario. Larsson sends 40 potatoes, gets 40 olives, and Donald the other way around. Total 210 minus 40 is 170, 30 plus 40 is 70, 36 plus 40 is 76, 252 minus 40 is 212. Doesn't change the total obviously, but now look. Larsson has gone from 150 potatoes and 50 olives to 170 potatoes and 70 olives. Donald has gone from 60 potatoes and 180 olives to 76 potatoes and 212 olives. Donald gets 26% more potatoes and 17% more olives. And Larsson can really enjoy the olives here. 40% more olives than he had before, and also more potatoes. So if one is better than the other at something, both get massively richer. So if this tariff escalation is a negotiation, great! If this leads to both countries cutting the tariffs, fantastic! And if it can also lead to removing other trade barriers, spectacular! But if they will cement this tariff escalation, it's a massive mistake. Everyone loses. Companies will sell less. Citizens will get less of everything. Then both Farmer Larsson and Farmer Donald will eat fewer potatoes and fewer olives. And if the ambition is to balance the trade deficit, that just isn't possible. That's just dumb. I wrote this to Peter Navarro. Take the offer and show everyone else this is what you want. US GDP 29 trillion, Vietnam GDP 400 billion. They just can't afford to buy as much from the US as the US buys from Vietnam to eliminate the trade deficit. Like I said in the previous video, a Vietnamese factory worker works 48 to 60 hours per week and earns $300 per month. They can't afford to buy as much from the US as the US buys from Vietnam. Not for decades at least. If we get this tariff stuff cancelled, stocks will pump back. Bitcoin will pump back. If this continues to escalate into a full-out global trade war, the stock market will drop more for the reasons I've just explained here, because the companies will actually sell less. The net present value of future cash flows is less, which kind of is what the company is worth, and the stock market is a bunch of companies. Then in that environment, I think high risk that Bitcoin drops too. People will rebalance their portfolios. It's not quite risk off gold yet, even though we of course hope it goes in that direction. In terms of the chart, Larsson Line remains blue since over a month ago. The target from this range breakdown, the double top confirmation, has been reached. Today once again we got exactly into the middle of this circle, and I think this level drawn here should provide some support, as I drew here a long time ago from current prices down to 73k. On the upside, the resistance is the same. We have to get back into this range, meaning break back about 90,800. If this support here breaks, then we deal with that when we get there. Since the big clue here really remains the stock market, let's look a little bit on the size of this drop compared to previous situations in the past. On the S&P 500, from the top in February down to the low of the current weekly candle is minus 21.35%. If you look at previous drops, that actually isn't that much. This drop that no one seemed to even remember now in 2022 was actually 28%. The COVID dip was 35%. And if we go further back in time to the financial crisis, that was 58%. Even the dot-com crash was over 50%. So actually 21% isn't that much. If this escalates into a full-out trade war, stock market can go much lower. And as we saw on the fake news on Monday, if the tariff war stops, stocks will pump back massively. So your job now is to go explain that even if one country is better at everything, both still benefit from trade. By the way, I see a lot of people lost a lot of money on Ethereum. I think that really wasn't necessary. This has been crystal clear for over a year, a straight line down with Larsson Line blue on ETH to BTC. ETH/USD made this head and shoulder pattern, confirmed exactly as Larsson Line flipped blue, and then it dropped another 50%. There was really no need to hang on this ride, guys. One last point, keep an eye out on BNB. As one of the few projects, it has flipped gold on Larsson Line on the BNB to BTC chart, and if it breaks up this neckline, that becomes an inverse head and shoulder with a massive target. Don't get scammed. I have only one website, it's ctolarsson.com. Press here for course and indicator, press here for Larsson Line Pro. Hope you learned something. Please subscribe. Thank you, tack. CTO Larsson out.